I always thought I knew my wife, Claire. After 12 years of marriage, you'd figure you've got someone's soul mapped out. Their quirks, their habits, the way they tilt their head when they're thinking hard about something. Claire was my constant, my anchor. We'd built a life together in our cozy Seattle suburb, a craftsman-style house with creaky floors and a backyard where our two kids, Ethan and Lily, chased fireflies on summer nights. I'm a structural engineer, the kind of guy who likes things to make sense, to fit together like the beams of a well-designed bridge. Claire, a graphic designer, brought the color to my blueprint world. She'd laugh at my dad jokes, leave sticky notes with doodled hearts on my laptop, and make me feel like I was the only man who'd ever mattered. Until I realized I wasn't. It started with small things, the IND you dismiss because life gets busy and you're not looking for cracks in the foundation. Claire started staying late at her studio, claiming deadlines for a big client project. She'd come home with her auburn hair slightly mussed, her eyes tired but bright, and I'd chalk it up to her passion for her work. She'd always been like that, pouring herself into her designs, losing track of time. I'd kiss her forehead, reheat dinner, and we'd fall into our routine. But then her phone started buzzing more often, messages she'd glance at and quickly swipe away. She'd laugh it off, say it was a client or a coworker, but there was a sharpness in her voice, a flicker of something I couldn't place. One evening, about 6 months ago, I noticed her perfume had changed. Claire had always worn this light, citrusy scent that reminded me of summer mornings. Now, there was something heavier, musky, like sandalwood and spice. I asked her about it, casual as I could manage, while we were washing dishes together. "Oh, just trying something new," she said, her hands pausing in the soapy water. Her smile was quick, but it didn't reach her eyes. I let it go. I didn't want to be that guy, the paranoid husband who reads betrayal into every little change. But the seed was planted, and it grew in the quiet moments when I was alone with my thoughts. The real shift came in the fall. Claire started going on work trips to Portland, a couple of hours away. She'd pack a small overnight bag, kiss me and the kids goodbye, and drive off with a wave. These trips were sporadic at first, once every couple of months, but by October they were happening every other week. She'd come back with stories about client meetings, late-night brainstorming sessions, and new projects that kept her buzzing with energy. I wanted to believe her. I did believe her at first, but there was a distance in her eyes when she talked about those trips, like she was reciting lines from a script she hadn't quite memorized. I started paying attention, not snooping, not yet, but noticing. The way her phone was always face down now. The way she'd take calls in the other room, her voice low and clipped. The way she'd flinch just slightly when I touched her unexpectedly. I told myself I was imagining things. Claire loved me. She'd chosen me, hadn't she? We'd met at a friend's barbecue, back when we were both fresh out of college, and she'd laughed at my terrible attempt to grill salmon. We'd built a life, 2 kids, a mortgage, a shared Netflix queue. That kind of thing doesn't just unravel. But it was unraveling. I felt it in the way she'd linger in the shower, as if washing something away. In the way she'd avoid my gaze when we talked about our day. In the way her laughter, once so easy, now sounded forced. I started waking up in the middle of the night, staring at the ceiling, wondering what I was missing. I didn't want to confront her. Confrontation meant admitting there might be something to confront. Instead, I watched and I waited, and I hated myself for it. It was a Thursday in November when I found the first real clue. Claire had left for another Portland trip, and I was home with the kids, helping Ethan with his math homework while Lily colored at the kitchen table. Claire's laptop was on the counter, still plugged in from the night before. She'd been working on a logo design, and I figured I'd check if she'd saved her work. She was notorious for forgetting to back things up. I opened the laptop and her email was still up. I wasn't looking for anything, I swear. But there it was, an email from someone named J. Carter. No subject line, just a short message. Asterisk, missed you last night. Same place next time? Let me know when you're back in town. Asterisk. My stomach dropped. I sat there, staring at the screen, the kids' chatter fading into white noise. J. Carter. I didn't know any J. Carter. Claire had never mentioned a J. Carter. I clicked on the email thread, my hands shaking. There were dozens of messages going back months. Short, cryptic exchanges about meeting up, about last time, about how she couldn't wait to see him again. One email had a photo attached. A selfie of Claire, smiling, her hair loose and windblown, standing on what looked like a balcony overlooking the Portland skyline. She was wearing a scarf I didn't recognize, and her eyes were brighter than I'd seen them in months. I closed the laptop, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. The kids were still talking, oblivious, and I forced myself to smile, to nod, to pretend everything was fine. But it wasn't. My wife was lying to me. My wife was meeting someone else. My wife was slipping away, and I hadn't even noticed until now. I didn't confront her when she got home the next day. Couldn't. The kids were there, and I didn't trust myself to stay calm. Instead, I started digging. I'm not proud of it, but I needed to know. I checked her phone when she was in the shower, scrolling through her texts. There was a number saved as work contact, but the messages were anything but professional. Asterisk, you looked incredible last night. Can't stop thinking about you. Delete this after you read it. Asterisk, my hands shook as I read them, my vision blurring. I put the phone back before she noticed, but the words burned into my brain. I started cross-referencing her trips with her calendar, her emails, anything I could access without crossing a line I couldn't come back from. I found hotel receipts in her work bag. Not the budget places she usually booked for client meetings, but boutique hotels, the kind with rooftop bars and king-sized beds. I found a parking ticket from a street in Portland I'd never heard of, dated the same weekend she told me she was at a conference. I even checked her car's GPS history when she was asleep, and there it was, an address in Portland, saved as a frequent destination. I didn't know who J. Carter was, but I was going to find out. I started with a simple Google search. J. Carter Portland didn't yield much at first, but I narrowed it down by cross-referencing with Claire's industry. Graphic design is a small world, and Portland's creative scene is even smaller. It didn't take long to find him. Julian Carter, a freelance photographer who worked with some of the same clients Claire did. His website was sleek, professional, with a portfolio of moody, atmospheric shots, cityscapes, portraits, the kind of stuff Claire loved. His bio mentioned he was based in Portland, single, with a penchant for capturing the beauty in the everyday. I hated him already. I found his social media next. His Instagram was public, filled with photos of art galleries, coffee shops, and late-night city streets. And there, buried in his stories from a month ago, was a shot of a woman's hand holding a glass of wine. Her nails painted a deep burgundy, Claire's favorite color. The caption read, asterisk, evening well spent. Asterisk, I knew that hand. I'd held it 1,000 times. I didn't sleep that night. I lay next to Claire, listening to her soft breathing, and felt like a stranger in my own bed. The woman I loved, the mother of my children, was living a secret life. I wanted to shake her awake, demand answers, but I couldn't. Not yet. I needed proof, something undeniable, something that would force her to admit what she'd done. And I needed to know why. Why wasn't I enough? What had I missed? What had Julian Carter given her that I couldn't? The next few weeks were a blur of quiet rage and calculated moves. I started tracking her trips more closely, noting the dates, the excuses, the little lies that piled up like bricks in a wall between us. I hired a private investigator, a guy named Mike who'd been recommended by a coworker who'd gone through something similar. Mike was discreet, professional, and didn't ask too many questions. I gave him Julian's name, the address from the GPS, and every detail I'd pieced together. I just need to know the truth, I told him. He nodded like he'd heard it all before. Mike's first report came a week later. Claire had been seen with Julian at a wine bar in Portland, laughing, her hand on his arm. They'd left together, heading to a hotel nearby. Mike had photos. Grainy, taken from a distance, but clear enough to see Claire's face, her smile, the way she leaned into Julian like he was her whole world. I stared at those photos for hours, my coffee going cold, my chest tight with a pain I couldn't name. It wasn't just betrayal. It was humiliation. It was the realization that the life I thought we had was a lie. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed more than photos, more than proof of her infidelity. I needed to understand how deep this went, how long she'd been planning to keep me in the dark. And I needed a plan of my own. Claire had broken something sacred, and I wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed. I started thinking about revenge. Not the petty kind, not slashing tires or spreading rumors. Something precise, something that would hit her where it hurt most. Something that would make her feel the weight of what she'd done. I kept up appearances at home, playing the loving husband, the doting father. I helped with homework, mowed the lawn, kissed Claire goodnight even as my stomach churned. But inside I was building something, a plan, a reckoning. I didn't know what it would look like yet, but I knew it would be cruel, calculated, and final. Claire had betrayed me, and I was going to make sure she regretted it. The weeks after I got Mike's report were like living in a pressure cooker. Every moment with Claire felt like a performance. A tightrope walk between pretending everything was fine and suppressing the rage that simmered just beneath my skin. I'd look at her across the breakfast table, pouring cereal for Ethan and Lily, and wonder how she could act so normal. How she could smile at me, kiss my cheek, and talk about her day like she wasn't carrying a secret that was tearing our life apart. I wanted to scream at her, to shake her and demand to know why she'd done this. But I held back. I had to. My plan was taking shape, and I needed to be patient, precise like the engineer I was. A bridge doesn't collapse because you chip away at one beam. It falls when you undermine the foundation. That's what I was going to do to Claire. Mike, the private investigator, kept delivering updates. Each one was a fresh cut, but I needed them to fuel my resolve. He tailed Claire on her next Portland trip, confirming what I already suspected. She was meeting Julian Carter again. More wine bars, more late-night walks, more hotel rooms. Mike's photos were sharper this time. Claire in a black dress I'd never seen. Her arm looped through Julian's, their heads close as they laughed under a streetlight. There was one shot of them kissing outside a restaurant, her hands on his chest, his fingers in her hair. I stared at that photo until my eyes burned, memorizing every detail, letting it sear into me. It wasn't just about the betrayal anymore. It was about the audacity, the way she thought she could live this double life and I'd never notice. I started digging deeper into Julian Carter. He wasn't just some photographer. He was a rising star in Portland's creative scene. The kind of guy who got invited to gallery openings and had a following on social media that made him seem larger than life. His Instagram was a curated fantasy, moody shots of foggy forests, candid portraits of artists, and cryptic captions that screamed self-important. I found interviews where he talked about living authentically and chasing what sets your soul on fire. I wanted to vomit. This was the man Claire was risking our family for? This pretentious, scarf-wearing cliché who probably spent more on coffee than I did on groceries? But I didn't stop at his public persona. I used every tool at my disposal, public records, social media connections, even a deep dive into his professional network. Julian had a reputation, it turned out. He was charming, talented, but also a player. There were whispers on industry forums, posts from scorned exes who'd been drawn in by his charisma only to be ghosted when he got bored. One woman, a copywriter from Eugene, had written a blog post about how Julian had strung her along for months, promising a future he never intended to deliver. It was deleted, but I found a cached version. Reading it felt like looking into my own future. Claire, discarded when Julian found his next muse. It should have made me feel sorry for her, but it didn't. It made me angrier. She'd chosen this guy over our family, and I wasn't going to let either of them walk away unscathed. I started laying the groundwork for my revenge. It wasn't enough to confront Claire or to expose her affair. I wanted something that would hit her where it hurt most, her pride, her career, her carefully curated image as the perfect wife and mother. I wanted Julian to feel it too, to watch his shiny little world crumble. But I had to be careful. I had kids to think about, a life to protect. Whatever I did, it had to be clean, calculated, and impossible to trace back to me. I wasn't going to be the scorned husband who lost everything in a fit of rage. I was going to be the one who won. The first step was gathering more evidence, not just for my own certainty but to build a case that could be used strategically. I installed a tracking app on Claire's phone when she was asleep, syncing it to my laptop so I could see her texts, calls, and location in real time. It felt like a violation, but she'd violated our marriage first. The app confirmed what Mike had already told me. Regular texts to work contact, Julian, coordinates that matched his apartment in Portland, and late-night calls that lasted hours. I saved everything, backing it up to a secure drive she'd never find. I also started recording conversations at home. Not full-time, just when I knew she'd be on the phone or when she thought I wasn't listening. One night, I caught her whispering in the laundry room, her voice soft and giddy. "I can't wait to see you. It's been too long." I stood outside the door, my fists clenched, and forced myself to breathe. I needed to stay focused. The second step was understanding Claire's world, the one she thought I didn't see. Her graphic design career was her pride and joy, the thing that made her feel alive. She worked freelance, but she was part of a tight-knit creative community, a network of designers, photographers, and marketers who collaborated on projects and hyped each other up online. Julian was part of that world, and so were a dozen other people who'd be at the same events, the same galleries, the same pitch meetings. I started following their accounts, creating a burner profile to lurk without being noticed. I learned their lingo, their inside jokes, the way they signaled status with a well-timed post or a name drop. Claire thrived in that world, and I knew that's where I'd hit her. I also started planting seeds at home, subtle things to test her reactions. I'd mention Portland casually, ask about her trips, watch her face for tells. "How's that client project going?" I'd say, pouring coffee, my tone light. She'd hesitate just a fraction of a second before launching into a vague story about deadlines and mood boards. I'd nod, smile, and file away every lie. I started leaving my own phone out, unlocked, to see if she'd snoop. She didn't. She was too confident, too sure I was clueless. That was her mistake. The kids were my anchor through all of this. Ethan, 9, was obsessed with soccer and always wanted me to kick the ball around in the backyard. Lily, 6, loved drawing like her mom, and we'd spend evenings at the kitchen table, her crayons scattered everywhere. I kept them out of it, shielding them from the storm brewing inside me. But I couldn't help wondering what would happen to them if this all fell apart. Would Claire try to take them? Would she drag them into her new life with Julian? The thought made my blood boil, but it also sharpened my focus. Whatever I did, it had to protect them, too. By December, I had a clearer picture of Julian's life. He lived in a trendy loft in Portland's Pearl District, rented, not owned. His finances weren't as solid as his Instagram suggested. He had a side hustle teaching photography workshops, which gave him access to a steady stream of starry-eyed students, mostly women. I found reviews of his workshops online, and while most were glowing, a few hinted at his flirtatious nature, his tendency to play favorites. I also found out he was pitching a big project with a local ad agency, one of Claire's biggest clients. That's when the pieces started coming together. The plan started to take shape over the holidays. Christmas was a tense affair. Claire was distracted, checking her phone under the table while we opened presents. I played along, laughing with the kids, carving the turkey, but I was watching her every move. After the kids went to bed, I sat her down and asked if everything was okay. "You seem off," I said, keeping my voice soft, concerned. She looked at me, her green eyes wide, and for a moment, I thought she might confess. But she just sighed, said work was stressful, and leaned into me for a hug. I hugged her back, but it felt like holding a stranger. I contacted Mike again, this time with a specific request. I wanted him to dig into Julian's past. Any dirt, any skeletons. I also asked him to keep tabs on Claire's next trip, to get me hard evidence I could use. Mike didn't ask why, he just nodded and got to work. A week later, he sent me a dossier on Julian. It was gold. Tax issues from a few years back, a dismissed harassment complaint from a former assistant, and a pattern of short-term relationships that ended badly. Nothing criminal, but enough to paint a picture of a man who used people and moved on. I also got a USB drive with audio from Claire's hotel room. Mike had called in a favor with a contact who worked at the hotel. I didn't listen to it. Couldn't. But I kept it, knowing it might be the final nail. My plan was coming into focus. I wasn't going to confront Claire with tears or yelling. I wasn't going to let her spin a story or beg for forgiveness. I was going to dismantle her world, piece by piece, in a way that left her no escape. The ad agency project was my entry point. Claire and Julian were collaborating on a campaign for a major outdoor brand, a career-defining opportunity for both of them. I started researching the agency, their values, their zero-tolerance policy for unprofessional conduct. I also looked into their competitors, smaller firms hungry for a chance to steal clients. If I could expose Claire and Julian's affair in a way that tanked their credibility, the agency would drop them, and the fallout would ripple through their precious creative community. But it wasn't just about their careers. I wanted Claire to feel the weight of her choices, to lose the things she valued most, her reputation, her social circle, her sense of self. I wanted Julian to face the same, to watch his carefully crafted persona crumble. I started drafting anonymous emails, vague but suggestive, hinting at inappropriate behavior between a designer and a photographer on a recent project. I didn't send them yet. I was still refining the wording, making sure they'd raise eyebrows without pointing directly to me. I also reached out to one of Julian's exes, the copywriter from Eugene, using a fake email address. I posed as a concerned colleague, asking if she'd ever seen anything off with Julian's professional conduct. She replied quickly, spilling details about his manipulative tactics, his tendency to blur lines between work and personal. It was more ammunition. By January, I was ready to move. Claire had another Portland trip planned, and I knew this was my chance. I told her I had a work conference in Tacoma, a lie to give me an alibi. I drove to Portland instead, checking into a motel on the outskirts of town. Mike was already there, ready to tail Claire and Julian. I spent the night in that dingy room, staring at my laptop, finalizing my plan. It wasn't just about exposing them anymore. It was about orchestrating a public fall, one that would leave them both humiliated and professionally ruined. I didn't know exactly how it would play out, but I knew it would be devastating. And I was ready to pull the trigger. The night I drove to Portland, the city was cloaked in a damp, gray mist that clung to everything. My windshield, my jacket, my thoughts. I checked into the motel at the edge of town, a nondescript place with flickering fluorescent lights and a clerk who didn't look up from his phone. My room smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap air freshener, but it was a fitting backdrop for what I was about to do. I sat on the sagging bed, my laptop open, the anonymous emails drafted and ready. My hands hovered over the keyboard, but I didn't send them yet. Timing was everything, and I needed to be sure every piece was in place. This wasn't just about exposing Claire's affair with Julian Carter. It was about dismantling the lives they'd built on lies, leaving them nowhere to hide. I wanted them to feel the kind of raw, gut-wrenching loss I'd been carrying for months. Mike, my private investigator, was already in position. He'd texted me earlier that evening. Claire and Julian were at a trendy rooftop bar in the Pearl District, one of those places with overpriced cocktails and fairy lights strung across reclaimed wood beams. Mike had a knack for blending in, and he'd promised to get me real-time updates, photos, audio, anything I could use. I told him to focus on anything public, anything that could be leveraged without looking like I'd orchestrated it. The last thing I needed was for this to blow back on me, to give Claire or Julian a way to spin themselves as victims. I'd spent weeks planning this, and I wasn't going to let sloppy execution ruin it. The plan was multi-layered, designed to hit Claire and Julian from every angle: professional, social, personal. The ad agency they were working with, Cascade Creative, was the linchpin. They were pitching a major campaign for an outdoor brand, a six-figure contract that could elevate both their careers. I'd learned through my research that Cascade had a strict code of conduct, especially after a scandal a few years back involving a senior exec and an intern. They were hypersensitive to anything that smelled like impropriety, and I was going to use that to my advantage. The anonymous emails I drafted were addressed to key players at Cascade: HR, the creative director, even the CEO. They didn't name Claire or Julian directly, but hinted at unprofessional conduct between a designer and a photographer on the outdoor brand project, with enough specifics to make them dig. I'd attached a few of Mike's photos, carefully cropped to obscure his methods, showing Claire and Julian in compromising moments. Her hand on his arm, their heads bent close, the hotel keycard in her purse. But the emails were just the start. I'd also been in touch with one of Julian's exes, the copywriter from Eugene, under my fake email alias. She'd given me enough dirt to know Julian's reputation was a house of cards. Charming until he got what he wanted, then cold and dismissive. I'd nudged her to share her story on a private industry forum, planting the idea that she wasn't the only one who'd been burned. She'd hesitated at first, worried about her own career, but I'd framed it as a way to protect others. People need to know who they're working with. I'd written, careful to keep my tone neutral. She'd posted late last week, a detailed account of Julian's manipulative behavior, and it was already getting traction. Other women were chiming in, sharing similar stories. The creative community was small, and gossip spread like wildfire. Julian's name was starting to carry a whiff of trouble, and I was going to fan those flames. For Claire, the blow would be more personal. Her career was her identity, but her social circle was her armor. The other designers, the gallery owners, the influencers who fawned over her work. I knew how much she valued their approval, how she lit up when someone praised her latest project or invited her to an exclusive event. I'd spent weeks mapping out that network, identifying the key players, the ones whose opinions mattered most. One of them, a designer named Rachel who ran a popular industry blog, was my next target. Rachel prided herself on being a tastemaker, the kind of person who could make or break a reputation with a single post. I'd crafted another anonymous tip, this one for Rachel's blog, suggesting that a certain designer was compromising her professionalism with a photographer known for questionable ethics. I included just enough detail, dates, locations, the name of the outdoor brand project, to make it credible without being obvious. Rachel was the type to dig, to post a vague but juicy call-out that would get everyone talking. And once the whispers started, Claire's perfect image would start to crack. But I wasn't stopping there. The final piece was the most brutal, the one that would cut Claire deepest. I'd found out through Mike that she and Julian were planning to present their campaign pitch at a big industry event in Portland, a showcase for creatives to network and impress clients. It was in 2 days, and they were slated to present their work to Cascade's executives and the outdoor brand's marketing team. I'd gotten my hands on their presentation slides. Claire had left her laptop open one night, and I'd copied the files while she slept. The pitch was good, polished, the kind of thing that could seal the deal. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I'd spent hours tweaking a version of their slides, subtle changes that would undermine their credibility without being immediately obvious. I swapped out a few key images for ones that were slightly off-brand, altered data points to make their market research look shoddy, and inserted typos that would make them seem careless. I also added a slide at the end, buried in the deck, with a screenshot of one of Mike's photos, Claire and Julian kissing outside the wine bar, captioned, "Team Chemistry." It was risky, but I knew it would be a bombshell if it got projected during their pitch. I sent the altered deck to a burner email, then forwarded it to the event organizer with a note claiming it was an updated version from Claire's team. I'd spoofed her email address to make it look legit. If it worked, they'd present the sabotage deck without realizing it until it was too late. The night before the event, Mike sent me a final update. Claire and Julian were at Julian's loft, planning to spend the night together before their big presentation. Mike had managed to get audio from a nearby cafe where they'd met earlier, talking openly about their affair. Claire's voice, soft and conspiratorial, made my stomach churn. "I know it's complicated, but being with you feels right. I can't keep pretending with him." I didn't listen to the rest. I didn't need to. The betrayal was clear, and it hardened my resolve. I sent the anonymous emails to Cascade's team, time to land in their inboxes just before the event. I also tipped off Rachel, knowing she'd be at the showcase and would likely post about it live. The dominoes were set. All I had to do was wait. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the motel bed, staring at the ceiling, running through every possible outcome. What if Claire figured it out? What if Julian talked his way out of it? What if the kids found out? Ethan and Lily were my North Star, the reason I hadn't just walked away. I'd already consulted a lawyer, quietly, to understand my options for custody. I'd moved money into a separate account just in case. I'd even started looking at apartments, preparing for the day I'd leave Claire behind. But first, I needed her to face the consequences of what she'd done. The morning of the event, I drove to the venue, a sleek convention center in downtown Portland. I didn't go inside. I couldn't risk being seen. Instead, I parked across the street, watching the crowd of creatives in their curated outfits, clutching coffee cups and portfolios. Mike was inside, blending in as a freelancer with a fake badge. He texted me updates. Claire and Julian were nervous but confident, schmoozing with clients, unaware of the storm about to hit. I sat in my car, my phone buzzing with notifications from Rachel's blog and the industry forum. The whispers were spreading, vague posts about unprofessional behavior and watch this space. Rachel had taken the bait, posting a cryptic teaser about big drama at the showcase. Then it happened. Mike texted me at 2:17 p.m. Asterisk presentation just started. They're using the altered deck. Asterisk my heart pounded as I waited. 10 minutes later, another text. Asterisk, slide with the photo just went up. Room is silent. Claire looks like she's going to pass out. Asterisk I could imagine it. Her face paling, Julian scrambling to explain, the executives exchanging glances. Mike sent a follow-up. Asterisk, they're trying to recover, but the client is pissed. Typos and bad data didn't help. Asterisk by 3 p.m., Rachel's blog had a new post. Major fumble at the Cascade pitch. Sources say a designer and photographer crossed lines, and their work was a mess. Names to follow. The forum was exploding, with people speculating about Claire and Julian, piecing together the rumors I'd seeded. I drove back to the motel, my hands steady on the wheel. It was done. Cascade pulled the contract that evening, citing concerns about professionalism. Claire's reputation in the creative community was in tatters, with Rachel's blog and the forum posts ensuring everyone knew why. Julian's workshops started getting canceled as his past caught up with him. I didn't go home right away. I needed time to let the dust settle, to let Claire feel the full weight of her fall. When I finally walked through the door 2 days later, she was waiting, her eyes red, her voice shaking. We need to talk, she said. I looked at her, the woman I'd loved for 12 years, and felt nothing but cold clarity. Yeah, I said. We do. But I wasn't going to let her control the narrative. I had the evidence, the leverage, and the upper hand. She'd betrayed me, and now she'd face the consequences. Not just of losing her career, but of losing the life she thought she could keep. The kids were at my parents' for the weekend, and I was ready to lay it all out. My revenge wasn't over. It was just beginning.